Okay, so here's a quick and dirty video about doing the center back pleating on an Enfoureau gown. If you notice, I have the center back of the outer gown fabric. There's a seam down the center of that. So this is the 20 inches I talk about in the instructions. Here's the bottom of it. Here's the top. I have that centered over the lining. So the pins that go down the center back are perfectly aligned with the center back of the lining on the inside. I've also marked where the waistline is. That's these couple of pins going straight across. Put a couple more pins just so you can see it better on this fabric. Once I know where that the waistline is, that's where I want to start my pleating. Now you notice this already has some creases in it. I just unpicked the seam so I could do it back again. But I'm going to pinch out about 1 inch away from the center back. And I'm going to pinch about 1/2 inch of fabric. Might be more or less depending on your size, but I find a good 1/2 inch seems to work. And you'll notice that that is roughly 1 inch away from the center back. You do want to double check, so I keep putting my hands underneath, that you haven't folded up your lining at all. And once you know your lining is flat back there, then you can put a pin in place to hold that pleat. Now, because this was already pleated before, it's going to line up pretty quickly, but I just keep pinching about 1/2 inch and smoothing that down, double checking that my lining is staying nice and flat underneath. So here's my center back pins. Here's the first row of pleating pins. As I move towards the top of the gown, you'll notice it's getting a little bit further away from the center back pleats. And that can be changed. It can be a pretty straight line, or on this one, I've made it a very, very gentle curve. I'm going to keep pinning. And because I'm changing the angle of the fabric, I actually have a little bit less than 1/2 inch towards the top. It's getting to be, down to the very top, it's only about 1/4 inch. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's only about 1/4 inch, if that, at the very top. And that's okay. One of the reasons that happens is that you're changing the grain line of the fabric, and that's changing the amount that the fabric can kind of stretch in one direction or another. I've also marked the top of my lining, so you can see the gown fabric actually comes up higher. We're going to end up cutting that away later, but I do want to make sure that my curves come up at least to the top of that lining point. Once the first pleat is pinned from the waist up, then I go back and do the second pleat. The second pleat I only want about 1/2 inch away. So I pinch 1/2 inch, but I'm only pinching it about 1/2 inch away from the first pleat, making sure that everything stays flat underneath. Put a pin, and then the second pleat runs roughly parallel to your first pleat. Pins are your friend. They're going to hold everything in place. And as you get up towards the very top, your pleat is again going to shrink. It's going to go from about 1/2 inch wide down to 1/4 inch or even less sometimes, and that's completely okay. And towards the very top, you can see it's angling out just a little bit. So down here, it's maybe 1/2 inch, tiny bit more by the time it gets up to the top. The pleat itself is 1/4 inch wide, but it's moved almost 1 inch away from the outer pleat. And again, that just helps give you the illusion of a narrow back. It kind of goes wider out here, and then it keeps getting narrower towards the waistline. Put some more pins in there. Make sure everything is held. I do like to make sure the pleats are pinned in place at least 1/2 inch, 1 inch above the top of the gown, so that stays. When you're ready, excuse me, when you're ready to sew, you will use some good hand sewing thread, and this is the spaced back stitch.